What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another one of my videos. This will be another deep dive style video like the two most recent ones I did of Ratchet and Clank and Hogwarts Legacy. Links in the description. The focus will be the RX 6800 XT versus the RTX 3080 Ti, and I'll also be throwing in my RX 7900 XTX and 4090 as well on the ray tracing parts, just out of curiosity. Also, please keep in mind that a 6800 XT is practically identical to a 7800 XT, and a 3080 Ti is practically identical to an RTX 4070 Super, so these numbers should be representative of how those two GPUs would perform in this game as well. I hope that Steve of Hardware Unboxed doesn't get mad at me, but I'll be stealing a little bit of his footage because for the 6800 XT we'll be using my Rog Strix OC 6800 XT, which I've manually overclocked, and this is one of my favorite AMD cards. It's a water-cooled hybrid card as well, so really good temperatures and nice overclocking. And for the 3080 Ti, we'll also be using an ROG Strix OC 3080 Ti. This one is air-cooled. For the 7900 XTX, we have a Sapphire Nitro Plus, which is also manually overclocked, and for the 4090, we have ASUS TUF OC 4090, which I've also manually overclocked a bit. Anyway, let's not waste any more time and dive into the numbers. We're going to begin with the settings like we usually do, and the 6800 XT will be on the left, RTX 3080 Ti on the right, and it's just going to be 1440p rasterization here. And we're essentially, I've chosen to make about a 10-minute run, I believe, where we wake up from the base, we make our way outside, we get into a little bit of a fight with a few zombies, and then we run away, as you should, from zombies, and then run across rooftops to a rallying point, and that is essentially the benchmarks. Then I take the numbers of averages and 1% lows at the end, and then I put them here on the screen. So now that you're seeing the numbers on the screen, that's what that means. So basically, the 3080 Ti has a 36% performance advantage on the 1% lows over the 6800 XT, and a 40% performance advantage on the averages over the 6800 XT. So the 3080 Ti is noticeably faster here at 1440p. Now, what I found a bit surprising later on, as you'll see, is on the 4K results, it seems the 6800 XT closes the gap a little bit, which is kind of interesting because, you know, we've come to sort of realize that the RX 6000 sort of had an advantage at 1440p, and then at 4K it was that way for the RTX 3000 series. But I've come to see lately that the 6000 actually does quite good at 4K compared to the 3080 Ti. But then again, I haven't made a ton of these comparisons. I've made a few, but I do find that a little bit surprising. So here we're reaching close to the end of this run. The next ones will be edited to be a bit shorter so we don't waste a lot of time, but that is essentially what it is. I begin the recording of the averages and 1% lows at the beginning of the benchmark, and then I take the readings at the end. Okay? So this one here is going to be 1440p with ray tracing. So essentially all the settings are maxed out for both cards. We're not using any upscaling or anything like that. And then after this run, I'll be throwing in the 4090 and 7900 XTX as well. Now, one thing I probably should have mentioned was that on the rasterization runs, I forgot to turn off the ray traced flashlight because it's a different toggle and I completely missed it. But it's not really a big deal. It doesn't cost much performance. It only costs performance when the flashlight is on, which we only turn on here when we're inside the building. Okay, now here it's not really that surprising, but the 3080 Ti has an even bigger advantage. So on the 1% lows, the 3080 Ti is 73% faster than the 6800 XT with ray tracing enabled. And on the averages, the 3080 Ti is 68% faster than the 6800 XT at 1440p with ray tracing enabled. 1440p native, that is. Now, as we continue to bash some zombie heads here, I felt the need to mention that actually playing this game on the 6800 XT, I was doing it on my LG C1 OLED TV, And even though we're well below 60 FPS, well, we're in the mid 40s, it actually felt pretty smooth. And as you can see on the frame times, the frame times are actually pretty smooth. I mean, we got 42 FPS average right now with 33 1% lows. That's pretty good. That's a narrower gap than the 3080 Ti has. Even though it has the overall advantage, as far as 1% lows, the 6800 XTs are a bit closer than the 3080 Ti's are. But yeah, I actually didn't find it too bad at 45 FPS. I know it's blasphemy with PC gaming, but I've been playing a little bit of Steam Deck lately, and I do use the 45 FPS cap on that, and it actually works quite well. But yeah, that's the end of our run here. And now I'll be comparing the 3080 Ti against the 4090 and 7900 XTX. I left the 6800 XT out of this because we already know what that is like, but this is kind of interesting. Now, the 3080 Ti is basically our 100% mark. So on the averages, that's 74 FPS, and 1% lows, that's 57 FPS. The 4090 is 70% faster than the 3080 Ti on the averages, and 74% faster on the 1% lows. The 7900 XTX, however, is 93% of the performance of the 3080 Ti on the averages, so it's actually a little bit slower. And it's the same thing with 1% lows. It's at 95% of the 3080 Ti's 57 FPS. So it is a bit slower than the 3080 Ti. Not by much. As a matter of fact, 1% low is right at the margin of error. But yeah, that is the case at 1440p with ray tracing native anyway. Okay. Now we're going to move on to 4K rasterization. And keep in mind that I did forget to toggle off the ray traced flashlight. But like I said, I did test this afterwards. It only costs a little bit of performance when you have the flashlight on, which we only have on in this very beginning area here. But other than that, it should be fairly representative of the rasterized performance with these GPUs. So we're going to make our way outside now, turn the flashlight off. And if we take a look at the numbers, it's actually kind of similar. 32% advantage for the 3080 Ti on the 1% lows, and 31% advantage for the 3080 Ti on the FPS averages. Again, 6800 XT is at that 45-50 mark. The frame times are pretty smooth actually, so this did feel pretty good to play. No issues. And the 3080 Ti is doing a little bit better here. As a matter of fact, if we hop over to the 1440p side, you can see that the 3080 Ti had a bit of a higher lead there, with 36% advantage on the 1% lows and 40% on the averages. And at 4K, that is 32% on the 1% lows and 31% on the averages. So that's quite interesting. Anyway, we'll go back to the 4K results here, and this is our results. The 3080 Ti is, noticeably ahead here, but that's the 4K results with rasterization though. Let's jump onto 4K with ray tracing. So let's look at the settings then, and for this one we're going to be using FSR and DLSS quality because it says 4K with ray tracing all maxed out. And I was actually surprised here by the 6800 XT, believe it or not. I mean, yeah, the 3080 Ti is very noticeably ahead, as is to be expected, but the 6800 XT is actually doing a pretty good job here. It's around that 45 FPS mark, which, and with very consistent frame time and 1% lows at that, which is pretty impressive in my opinion. I would definitely say it can be playable, sure. Or you could tweak some ray tracing effects, or you could just turn ray tracing off, right? Again, this is just more of an academic view of these two cards, and Dying Light 2 and how it's aged after patches. I mean, we found out on Ratchet and Clank that AMD had caught up a little bit, and I was actually impressed with the performance of the 6800 XT especially. It did pretty well. Also, the 7900 XTX, where the 3080 Ti was a bit faster when the game released, it was actually about up to par and a little bit faster than the 3080 Ti 5 months after the game. So that's kind of why I like to look at these titles, and why I wanted to make this series, I guess, if you will, of a deep dive. It's what I may call it. But anyway, we have 100% faster on the 3080 Ti on the 1% lows and 61% faster than the 6800 XT on the averages with 4K ray tracing DLSS FSR quality. Now again here, I'll be putting the RTX 4090 and 7900 XTX against the 3080 Ti. And our 3080 Ti is the 100% mark with averages of 64 FPS and 1% lows of 50 FPS. If we look at the 7900 XTX, it's pretty much a draw across the board. At the end of the benchmark, it's practically identical to the 3080 Ti on the averages and 1% lows. The 4090 is actually similar advantage over the 3080 Ti as we had at 1440p. Basically, 4090 is 73% faster on the averages than the 3080 Ti and 70% faster on the 1% lows than the 3080 Ti. And I guess the 7900 XTX, since 3080 Ti and 7900 XTX are pretty much equivalent here. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up for this look or deep dive, if you will, of Dying Light 2, with the main focus being 6800 XT and 3080 Ti. But anyway, if you guys did like this, give it a like, and if you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing. If you have any suggestions that you want me to take a look at, or I'm looking particularly for some VRAM hungry games, I want to kind of dive into this 12 gigabyte of VRAM on the 3080 Ti and see if it is or becomes problematic in the future. So far, Ratchet and Clank has pretty much been the only title that tends to have some issues at 4K with ray tracing, but other than that, these are the results, guys. This is the end of the benchmark. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. Bye-bye.